Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 75 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts podcast network. I am your host, Rocky Petrella at Dynasty FF Addict. Back here with Scott Sidlow at Scott_Sidlow. Scott, I was going to start off with, mention it's week 14. We're right on the verge of the playoffs, but I feel like I have to mention, because we always broadcast during the Thursday games, man. Dalvin Cook was not even supposed to play tonight, and he's got 144 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's insane. What do you think of watching this game? It's nuts.
I mean, he's my only hope against you in the Tech Mobile League that we broke down on this very podcast at the beginning of the year. So yeah, I'm going to need him to score about 60. So far, so good.
Yeah, I mentioned before the show, somebody put on Twitter about 20 minutes ago that he was had 117, was on pace to break the single game rushing record. So we'll see if he can pull that off. But we got a great guest tonight here.
The best,
perhaps the best impressionist / song parody guy / fantasy football analyst I know, at least in the top 3. So Jake Trowbridge is with us. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm shocked I cracked the top 3, honestly. I thought I'd be fringe top 10, kind of on the outside looking in a little bit, but I'm glad to see that cumulatively of all those things, I'm somewhere in the mix.
Okay. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Jake. I'm very happy to have you here. So we always start off with some of the injuries and news. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on this week, so I'm going to try and run through this quick because we got a lot of other stuff to cover tonight. I basically just threw on some of the major ones that came out, and there really wasn't too much. Logan Thomas had the knee injury. They found out it wasn't an ACL, but they put him on IR anyway. I'm just going to run through all these and let you guys, if you want to comment on any of them. If not, we'll move on. So the Corey Davis goes to IR. Not a big deal, other than maybe wheels up even further for Elijah Moore. Elijah Mitchell's in the concussion protocol. And then Thielen had the ankle sprain, is out tonight, and his timeline's a little unclear. So any thoughts on any of these guys, Scott?
I think just Mitchell, I think, was a little scary because I think his symptoms kind of showed up more on Monday, I believe. And there were a couple guys this week that happened with. So that's never good. The delayed onset. I've had one of those before, and you kind of a little bit foggy, and I don't know. These guys seem to bounce back quickly, but you can never be too sure with those. So I don't think at this point that whatever other ailments he has, ankle, knee, whatever, that whole backfield's kind of banged up. So just got to keep an eye on it. If he plays, he's playing, and he's getting the workload. They've shown that this year. So I think he's either going to be out and we'll know ahead of time, or if he's playing, plug him in. Let's roll.
What about you, Jake? Any thoughts on any of these injuries in terms of fantasy, dynasty, whatever?
I mean, it's nice that they're kind of clear-cut injuries for once this week. There's so many other weeks where it's like we don't know until kickoff. I mean, Dalvin Cook's a perfect example of tonight. Like, we're all waiting with bated breath. That's not the case for any of these guys. We basically know, like you said, with Mitchell, we'll know if he's starting, and then if he is, he's a go. So from that perspective, it's actually kind of nice.
Yeah, and then good thing with Mitchell too is, I mean, we'll have a real clear idea of who else might be the start. I mean, they have hardly any running backs that are healthy, so Jeff Wilson might not play. It could be just the JaMychal Hasty show. I think if Wilson's healthy enough, it's the Wilson show. So the one other guy I was going to mention here is just Logan Thomas. Just this probably is going to sound weird from a dynasty perspective. I kind of like him as maybe a buy. He's 30, and most people are probably thinking he's dust because he's got a season-ending injury. He's been injured most of the year. I still think he's going to be the tight end there next year, and you could probably get him for like a third right now. And he produced really well while he was in the lineup this year. I mean, it wasn't a lot of games, but even just off this last injury, he came back for 2 games, scored a touchdown in one, almost scored a touchdown in the other, and they were targeting him plenty. So he's a guy I think you can get for like next to nothing. That I think, he's 30, but I mean, tight ends can go till like they're 33, 34, and he hasn't been playing the tight end position a long. He got converted to tight end and wasn't getting a lot of time prior to like last year. So I definitely think he's a guy you could get for cheap that nobody's really going to be thinking about, and maybe just get. I wouldn't even target him specifically. Maybe just throw Logan Thomas into this bigger deal or something like that.
For sure. I love that. And I wasn't big on Logan Thomas coming into this year. I kind of whiffed on him, honestly. I was thinking it was like a Gary Barnidge situation with him, and it wasn't, and it isn't. So yeah, I love that.
Again, the only other thing I wanted to mention here, a little news piece, was that Joe Brady was fired, the Panthers offensive coordinator, during their bye week, because it's all his fault that they lost their best player and have no quarterback, apparently. I guess the biggest thing I wanted to mention out of this is that the only piece I really care about that's there now is DJ Moore. So I'm just curious in general, and not that this Brady firing necessarily affects him one way or another this year for sure, but where are you guys at on DJ Moore? Because I was super high on him, and he's kind of never lived up to the billing. So Jake, what do you think on DJ Moore?
I think he remains a solid wide receiver 2 for me going forward. I really haven't adjusted him much at all. It's just he's always a victim of stupid circumstance. Like he cannot catch a break. I don't know. But I'm out on him being the superstar wide receiver. I've never really seen that personally, and I don't project that going forward. But I think he'll continue to be a really reliable guy because even for the majority of this year, he has been. It's just felt really weird most of the time. But he's good enough where like the worst circumstances are happening and he's chugging through it. So, better things on the horizon.
Yeah, and I was previously on that DJ Moore is going to be a wide receiver 1 train, but I've come down to earth like where you are. He's a solid wide receiver 2. It hurts so much too because he started off so great when Sam Darnold had those good first 3 games. I think DJ Moore had 3 touchdowns, which has always been his problem, and turned out Sam Darnold turned back into a pumpkin, and DJ Moore's touchdowns dried up, and Cam Newton, had that awful game last week. So Scott, where are you at on DJ Moore?
Yeah, I was never really a DJ Moore guy. I didn't really get it. I don't know. I guess like I remember that rookie class. His similarities for me were to like Stephon Diggs, but not. I mean, Diggs is an incredible route runner, and I think DJ Moore is a very good route runner too. But he's not that like physical, big, like contested catch touchdown guy, and we've seen that he doesn't score touchdowns. So it's like he's kind of like the new Julio from that standpoint. Whereas like he's going to make those run after the catch, he's going to get you some big plays, but like he doesn't score the touchdowns.
I agree, he isn't, but I always thought that like Chris Godwin isn't that type of guy either, and Chris Godwin can still get you like 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdowns. I always thought DJ Moore could. Maybe if he had Tom Brady, he could get 8 touchdowns.
I agree. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of people are saying that was Julio's problem was the quarterback, Matt Ryan, because look at Pitts. He doesn't score touchdowns either. So,
yeah,
I mean, that very well may be. DJ Moore, it's probably a buying opportunity. I don't know what they're doing there at this point. Joe Brady was like the greatest thing since sliced bread, like 9 months ago. And now he's fired. Like what? Like just, and it's like, I almost felt bad for him because it's like just after all the college hiring went on,
right.
If he had been fired like 2 weeks ago, like he'd probably be the head coach somewhere right now. You know what I mean? Like, so I kind of feel for him. I'll be curious to see where he goes and what he does. I don't think he had a lot to work with. And he did show some good. Yeah. I mean, the first 3 games, right? We saw like what that offense could be. So, I think it's really interesting. And I think ultimately Matt Rule wants to kind of put his stamp on it. If he's going to go down with the ship, it's got to be up to him. So I can understand why they're doing that, but still, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing with any of those pieces. DJ Moore, maybe, I guess, if you want to buy, otherwise he's probably a hold at this point. Just let's see what happens next year. They'll get a quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. He's not someone I have a decent amount of DJ Moore already, but he's not someone I'm looking to acquire at this point. But there's no point in selling him. I wouldn't say he's not at an all-time low or anything, but he's certainly not anybody that anyone else is probably going to be pursuing either. So why bother? Okay, so we'll get right into it. We actually got a listener question that got DM'd to me earlier this week, and I did answer the guy because he DM'd me, but I wanted to get your guys' take on this, and then I guess I'll let you know what I said to him. It came from a listener, Mike Gherkin at Midwest Pats fan, and he says, in one of my leagues, which is a 10-team PPR 1 QB, I have a good team on paper, but injuries have really hurt me. He had Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Calvin Ridley, Robert Woods. Says he's currently seeded 5th, though, with the 6-7 record. The thing is, there's 4 other teams with the same record. Because of points, he's the top spot of that group. He says, I know I can't win this thing, so do I tank this week to improve my draft spot? But he also says the other option is I have been in talks with the Terry McLaurin manager who wants my first and Damian Harris for him. Do I do that trade and try and win this week to keep that draft pick in the back half of the draft and maybe get in there and see what happens? So, Jake, I'll let you go first on this one. I see you thinking hard there. So what do you think?
Yeah, this is such a tough spot to be put in. Personally, I'm not a fan of active tanking in a particular week. That's just not for me. But I understand if you truly just like, man, it's not happening, then okay, do what you got to do. But I am always of the mindset, like, if you get into the playoffs, truly anything can happen in the fantasy playoffs. And if you are right on the verge with this, my mindset is like, just go in and see what you can do. See what kind of other chaos happens throughout the fantasy playoffs. And you might be the beneficiary of that. Because, no time like the playoffs does luck play a big part here. So that trade, though, is very interesting. And if you're in a position where that's basically a done deal with the Damian Harris in the first for McLaurin, I'm very comfortable with that. I don't think it's going to make or break the fantasy playoffs for this team personally, but it could certainly help.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. But Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off of what we talked about last week with being in the middle and kind of basing off my experience. Is there going to be a big difference between having the 106 and the 108? Like, if you're the first team out and you have the 107, or if you start tanking and you have 1 week to get down and maybe points-wise you get the 105, is there that big of a difference? So I'd rather take the risk of anything can happen once you're in the playoffs, right? So even if I make a run and then get crushed and I get the 110 or something, I mean, fine. I'd rather do that. There's not that big of a difference. The 101 to the 104 is a lot bigger of a difference than the 105 to the 108. You know what I mean? And so I'd rather just go for it. As far as the trade, McLaurin hasn't been great with Heineke. So basically this whole season. And giving up Damian Harris in the first, I think it's a good trade. I'd rather have McLaurin for sure. But I guess it depends on, he's a little bit older. He came into the league a little bit older, so he's older than people think. He's not 25. People generally are like, well, he's been in the league a couple of years. He's still young, but he's actually not as young as you think. So I don't know. That maybe pushes me the other way. It depends, because you lost 2 good receivers with Ridley and Woods. So I don't know who else you're starting. If you have to start 3 wide receivers, can you start 2? Is it going to make that much of a difference? Like, if you think you can make it to the top 3 and win some money, then yeah, go for it, because all you're going to get with that first next year is you're going to try to hope to get the next Terry McLaurin. So, I'm always willing to do that trade for the proven guy.
Yeah, and basically my answer to this guy was kind of a combination of what you two said. Basically, I said the exact thing you were saying, that if he's where he is now, that pick is not going to move that much if he tanks this week. And just like Jake said, that was a big stress point for me to him, is that I'm not going to actively tank any week, any season, anything like that. I'm not a fan of that at all. So I basically just told him to do nothing. That's what I told him. The trade is okay. I agree with you. I'd prefer Terry McLaurin probably, definitely over Damian Harris. I just don't know that I want to give up the first. It could be a non-playoff first, depending on what happens this week. That's the other thing, too, I told him is that, he could tank this week or try in a tank this week, and maybe some other teams lose, and he still gets in anyway. So what's the point? So I figured, just hold on to your firsts. Don't tank, see what happens. And, worst case, you have like the one, if you really think your team's not going to contend, you have the 107 or whatever it is, the lowest playoff pick. It's really not that big of a difference to me. So yeah, it's a kind of boring answer. That's what I told him. Just do nothing. Don't tank. Don't do the trade, and just see what happens. Like Jake said, embrace the chaos, and maybe it goes your way in the playoffs where it didn't for the regular season. But we're gonna get into our main topic for the night, which was kind of trying to figure out this dynasty running back landscape right now. It's kind of, I was talking with Scott about this idea the other day, and we were just both like, yes, we need to talk about this because we're in a really weird place with running back. There's only like a few young guys that are producing well, and then everyone else is either old and was producing and no one thinks they have any value for next year. So, or young and not producing. So, wanted to get into kind of where we're seeing these guys. So we're going to do a little exercise. We all came up with a top 12, RB1s in our minds. And the way, I don't know exactly how these guys looked at it because we didn't really define it. But the way I'm looking at it is just, I'm not worried about these last 4 weeks. I was just looking at it as going forward, going into the off season into next season. Which guy would I want? That's kind of how I did it. So I don't know if that's how you guys did it, but we're going to get into them one at a time, go 1 through 2, everybody's 1 through 12 is, and I'm going to kind of try and keep track as we go and maybe come up with a little bit of a consensus at the end. So does anybody not have JT as their one?
No, sorry. Couldn't be me. Couldn't be me.
So yeah, I figured JT was. Well, I don't think we really need to talk about him too much. So obviously he's been amazing this year. He's got the draft capital. He's locked in there. I think he's just a tier above everybody else at this point. So Jake, who's your 2 then?
2 I really struggled with. There was about 3 names that I kind of rotated in and out of this spot, but I ultimately landed on an injured fella by the name of DeAndre Swift. He proved me wrong this year when he played. I was terrified of him this year. I ended up taking him in redraft in like the 5th round or something because he fell. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have touched Swift at all. But you saw him produce despite one of the worst offenses we've seen in like a decade on the Lions this year. So that was as much of a vote of confidence as I needed. The workload, they trusted him with that, and he's a great pass catcher. And ultimately, he's still very young.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Swift was my 2 as well. And I mean, the negatives are the Lions offense, basically, which, his situation, I think, has nowhere to go with up. And he was producing very well, with that bad offense. So yeah, he's, like I said, to me, he's a clear tier below JT, but he was pretty easily the 2 for me. Scott, is he your 2?
So he's kind of my 2C. I mean, really, I have 3 guys, and Jake, I'll be curious to see if we have the same 3, but it was kind of situation for me. I mean, we know how disastrous the Lions franchise is, and it's just hard to trust from any aspect. So I guess you could make the argument, like you said, Jake, the fact that he's producing is incredible, right? That's how good he is. And it's hard for me to really go against him in any way. He was my RB1 in that class. So, clearly I loved him from the start, and it's awesome to see him come through for me there. I have based on situation, I have him 4, but he could be 2. Like, I'd have no issue with him at 2. And then I just had it's really for me, Najee and Javonte Williams, both right in this whole basically that's the next tier for me It's JT, and then it's Najee, Javonte, and Swift, and you can put those guys in any order. I would guess Javonte would be 4 for most people, or probably further down for most people. But I love Shermer's offense. I love his opportunity. You could see they're locking up wide receivers there for the future and trying to make a run at a quarterback. So I think he has nothing but upside, and we got a little bit of a glimpse of that last week. So age-wise too, for me, I just want these young running backs, or I pretty much don't want them at all. So that's why they're going to be in my next. I should say this. This is how I thought about if I were drafting a startup today, and I was forced to take a running back, who would I take? And then so I'd say I would take JT, and JT's not there. I would take Najee. Najee's not there. I would take. So that's kind of the way that I looked at this. Like if I have to take a running back right now, and out of who's available. So Najee, Javonte, and Swift are kind of that second tier for me.
Scott, we're supposed to go one at a time. You're naming like 3 guys at once. What are you
They're
doing?
all tied.
But Najee's my 3. Yeah, I mean, he's producing great in his rookie year, and not a great situation really. He's got the corpse of Ben Roethlisberger. It's not a great offensive line.
Terrible line.
Yeah, so Najee was my 3, and Javonte was my 4. So he's looked amazing in the den, and another not good offense, and splitting time. I mean, we saw what he could do, given the run by himself this past week, and he looked amazing. He's I believe leading the league, and I think second to Jonathan Taylor in missed tackles, in much less carries. So. Yeah, I just think it's wheels up next year. We expect Melvin Gordon to be gone. So, Jake, did you had those? Do you have those 2 at 3 and 4 in some order?
I have 3. I'm in lockstep through 3 with Najee there at 3, and then it got difficult, and it didn't feel good to put this guy at number 4, but I felt like I still had to give due respect for some reason to CMC. It felt weird having him outside of this range. I felt like I should have had him higher, and I couldn't.
Wait till
like,
you see where I have him.
Put him. Oh Lord, I couldn't get him into my top 3. It just that didn't feel right. He's kind of in this weird limbo space. My issue is, of course, it's durability. What I think is going to happen with CMC is that they're going to have to lessen his touches. And we know that he can still be incredibly efficient, and he's an amazing running back overall and pass catcher. So his value should still be really, really good for another 3 years. But he's just not going to get the same workload, which is fine, because then hopefully you can keep him healthy. But Najee, what I want to bring up about him, keeping him at number 3, he was almost my number 2, because it's a very similar deal with Swift. It's the worst of the worst situations for him right now. And he's getting so many touches that it almost doesn't matter. So once those touches start to become more meaningful in that offense, which they just have to, once Ben is out of the picture, then, it's the moon, as the kids say.
Yes.
So CMC at 4. I'll get to where I have him when we get down that far. Scott, you already got through your top 4, so why don't you give who your 5 is?
Okay, so this is another tier then for me. So I will start with 5, and
name 6 guys this time.
I went with Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook at my 5 spot there. He is 26, so he's getting up there, but there's a couple other guys coming up there about his age and older anyway. So he's kind of to me, the safest for the near future. I guess he's getting the volume and he can handle it for the most part, other than whatever the shoulder thing is. But he seems to be banged up, but he seems to play, and he's not missed near the amount of games CMC has. So for me in this 3rd tier, then I would take Cook next.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel silly now with this game tonight. You guys are gonna think I'm crazy when we get through my whole list, because I did not put Cook on my top 12.
What?
Wow.
Mainly just because coming into this game, he's produced solidly this year. He hasn't had as many boom games as Cook has had in the past. He's getting banged up like he always does, and the age thing. I'm not generally an ageist, but when it comes to running backs hitting 26, 27, I kind of am. So I just, like, as you'll see, I kind of downgraded most of the old guys, and Cook, like I said, I kind of was worried with this latest injury. I did not expect when I made my list a couple days ago or yesterday that he was going to be coming back tonight either and running for 150 yards in the first half. So I maybe should have put him on there, but yeah, where did you have Cook on your list, Jake?
I do. I thought I had him too low. I thought you guys were going to call me crazy because I have him at number 8. And it was really a lot of the durability issues. And it's not that he's not an amazing player, as we're obviously seeing tonight. And if I had waited and watched the first half and then adjusted these rankings, he'd be at like, what's better than 1? I don't know, that little asterisk above everybody else. But it is kind of a function of like, I think there's going to be a big shift with Minnesota coming up here. And I don't know where he falls into those plans. And that's where, I mean, this whole thing with ranking running backs for Dynasty is so tough because situations change in an instant for any of these guys. And the ceiling can be easily attainable or the floor can drop out immediately. I'm thinking it doesn't drop out on him, but if there's a big reshuffling of the Vikings offense next year, then I have questions for him.
And yeah, I agree. And just for the record, I mean, this could change like every single day. I could do this tomorrow and I would order them totally differently. So,
Right.
But at 5, I had Joe Mixon. He's finally kind of produced the way we always hoped he would. He's tied to a great offense who's everyone there is going to be there for a while, including him. I don't know when they have the easiest out in this contract, but he is, if they won him there for multiple years, he's been extended. You know, he's got Joe Burrow as his quarterback. The volume he gets is insane now. I mean, it was previously, but I think since Gio left, it's got even better. And he's kind of the youngest of some of this older guard, that we're talking about, like Cook and McCaffrey. He's a year younger than most of those guys, which helps too. So I ended up putting Mixon at 5. Cook was your 5. So Jake, who was your 5?
I went with a youngish guy of that ilk as well in Nick Chubb. He's just barely slightly under those guys. I believe he's 25 still though currently. And what's interesting to me about Chubb is I've never really had him in redraft ever because his price always seemed too high. His ADP always felt too high to me, given, especially now, like he's sharing that backfield with Kareem Hunt. But that experiment could be up at any time as well. And so if he is lucky enough to finally get the backfield to himself in any meaningful way, as we've seen with a couple of games this year, then he's just so dominant. I know it's the Browns, and that's why I actually questioned putting him in at 5. It's like, well, it's the Browns, but he's another guy. I'm addicted to these guys who are in the worst situation and still making it happen. And so I had to get Chubb in there.
Yeah, my main concern with Chubb is just the lack, because obviously we're looking at this from a PPR perspective. Most people are playing PPR. The lack of the pass catching work and Hunt being there. Hunt likes to steal those touchdowns. He steals most of the passing work, but yeah, I just Scott just disappeared on us.
Well, I bored him with my Nick Chubb take there, or are you so outraged by it that he had to get as far away from me as possible?
I believe Scott, he DM'd me, is having technical difficulties, so let me just get rid of this for the people watching. Okay, there we go. So yeah, we'll just keep moving on. We'll have to get Scott to catch up when he comes back. So you had Chubb there. So that was 5. I believe I gave my 5 of Mixon. At 6, I went young again, and this is probably going to seem way too high because I haven't said Chubb, I haven't said Cook, but I just love this guy, and he's finally producing the way I expected him to this year. It's Antonio Gibson, another young guy. one of the big issues there is McKissick. He takes a lot of that passing work, but A, his contract is up at the end of this year. B, he's 29 years old. I mean, they could resign him. He's not going to cost them much, but I'm hoping he's not in the picture much longer. And C, they've actually been giving Gibson some passing work since their bye a few weeks ago. He had a 7-catch game recently. Even with McKissick, it was in a game that McKissick scored 2 touchdowns. Gibson still got 7 catches. They're just feeding him the ball. I think a lot of this year was a product of that shin injury that we kept hearing about every week. Ever since the bye, it seems like it may have healed up, and he's producing very well. I mean, I guess the biggest issue besides McKissick is just that the offense isn't amazing right now. I kind of think Heineke may not be the quarterback next year. We can hope for an upgrade, maybe not, since they're potentially a playoff team. So I don't know that they're going to be drafting a guy. Maybe they will, because a lot of these guys aren't going to go high this year, at least from what you hear. That there's a lot of guys, but there's no the guy or a couple of outstanding prospects. So what are your thoughts on Gibson, Jake? And did he even make your list?
He did. He got into my top 12. I felt a little foolish having him at 11, where he is on my list right now. And because there's so much room for growth with him that isn't there for a lot of the guys that I put ahead of him. And so, ultimately I could tinker around with this probably and move him as far up as 7. But I am a little concerned about the situation with the quarterback. I know, like you said, Heineke, maybe not their guy for the future. They could draft sort of a project quarterback for next year, have Heineke maybe there as a bridge, or they could do something as terrible for fantasy as taking Jimmy Garoppolo on or something like that. I could see all of those outcomes, and that would terrify me, quite frankly. But I mean, the fact that Gibson was a wide receiver in college, comes into the NFL, we haven't gotten to see enough of that from him yet. I'm sure pass blocking played a big role in why we haven't seen that yet. And like you said, with McKissick hopefully out of the way here next year, that could open up that door pretty wide. And then he'd look pretty stupid at number 11 here.
And it's kind of funny how this seems to keep happening with certain guys. Like Sony Michel, when he came out, he was known as a guy who catch passes. Josh Jacobs, when he came out, it was one of his pluses that he could catch passes. Gibson was a friggin' wide receiver, and we didn't even know at first that he was going to be, designated running back when he was drafted. And yet, all these guys, Jacobs actually is also finally starting to get thrown the ball these last few weeks, even with Drake there. Now that Drake's out, I think he might get a lot more. But yeah, I think he had like 9 targets this past week. So, but yeah, Gibson definitely, I think is a guy that you should be trying to get. Well, it might be too late now. You should have gotten him probably a month ago when everybody was down. But he definitely has room to grow, like you said, a lot of room to improve. And we got Kyle Sender in the chat. He's here almost every week. Love Kyle. He mentioned he had the identical top 5 to you, Jake, and he does have Gibson at RB6. We're through my top 6. So what's your number 6?
This is another one I didn't feel good about, and I think I could easily flip flop number 6 and 7. This is really tough. I would have Kamara at 6 still. And it's purely because in terms of PPR and in terms of bad situations, like I swear I'm addicted to these types of players, but he is once again in an unenviable situation in New Orleans right now. And it's not really affecting him. Like, I know that he's had maybe a down week, and otherwise he's been pretty steady still in that garbage offense that is happening there. Like, I know he's old, but he is not somebody who's going to grow into his age as poorly as a lot of these guys on the list. Like, I maintain that there is a Danny Woodhead type of experience to be had with Alvin Kamara, meaning like at age 29, Alvin Kamara can still be incredibly relevant for your team. I don't think that's the case with most anybody else on this list, maybe save for 1 or 2. So that's why I still have him deep in my heart and in my top 6 here.
Yeah, and I do have Kamara on my list, a little bit lower. I have him at 10, partially because of the age. partially, which, and I do agree. I think a lot of these pass catching type backs, or at least where they get more of their points from pass catching, I think they do have a longer shelf life, which means maybe I shouldn't be down on CMC as much on CMC as I am. Try saying that 5 times fast. But I think it's partially my heart there, just to, I can't deal with these injuries. After 2 years, I want the headache gone, I think, is part of it. So in 6 months, I'll probably move CMC up my board from where I have him. But anyway, Kamara, it's the age a little bit. The situation is also concerning to me. We don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be. The offense is kind of just like, it's basically Kamara and nobody else. So Michael Thomas is not going to be there after this year. They have nothing at wide receiver. I'm sure they'll probably draft one. But it's all just there's a whole bunch of factors that concern me a little. So I just knocked him down some. But I agree. He's definitely a guy that should still be in the RB1 conversation. So that was your 6. So I will go to my 7, since for those listening, by the way, you may have not seen Scott disappear. He was having some technical difficulties. He's hoping to make it back here. I don't know if he will or not, but so you'll just be hearing from me and Jake for a little bit unless Scott shows back up. But anyway, at 7, I have one Saquon Barkley. So, which is kind of funny because a lot of the stuff I just said about Alvin Kamara applies to Saquon Barkley. Right. He is at least a couple of years younger. I still think the upside is there. He looked really good. When he came back at the beginning of the year, he was they were still limiting him because of the injury. By about game 3, he started producing a couple games. I think he had 2 25-ish point games, like weeks 3 and 4. Was looking like the old Saquon, even in a not great offense. And then he just happens to step on a guy and rolls his ankle and is out a bunch of weeks. But I don't kind of lump him into the Christian McCaffrey category either. I mean, he had one injury last year, it was a devastating injury, as an ACL, and then he had a fluke thing this year. With CMC, it's been like this injury and that injury and a couple soft tissue injuries, and that's why I'm kind of getting out on him. And he's a year plus older than Saquon. So yeah, I still believe in the upside of Saquon. I'm hoping the offensive line can improve next year. I'm hoping for a quarterback upgrade next year. So some of this is hope, but I think there's more upside there in Saquon right now than there is in McCaffrey, and even in Kamara. I mean, I think Saquon's inherently a better talent than Kamara. It's just a matter of if the situation can improve enough. And since both of them need situation improvements, I put Saquon higher. So did you have Saquon on your list, Jake? And where are you at on Saquon?
Yeah, I had him further down, but I had him at number 9. So, which again feels outrageous.
I know.
Coming into the season, like there's no way I would have put him outside
like a changing
of my
of the guard
5.
right now. Yeah,
it really feels like that. It feels like this crazy wave is crashing over in terms of the youth movement, or so to speak, at rookies, or excuse me, at running backs. Even though I only have like 2 young guys up here at the top, but Saquon at number 9 is more a product for me of, it's not just the injuries, it's also a frustration with the inconsistency that you get. And not even so much game to game, but like play to play. You get crazy inconsistency from Saquon. I know part of it is his situation, because it's like, okay, Saquon ran for 65 yards. Fantastic. And now his next 8 runs all went for like 2 yards total. And it's like, what is happening with this? Like, he's either going to hit it big or he's not going to hit it at all. That's what she said. And it's just a little bit frustrating to have to deal with that. So I liked the consistency of some of these guys a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, obviously it still feels real weird having him at number 9.
Okay, so yeah, but not too far off. We may never know where Scott had Saquon, but we're just going to bust on Scott until he shows up again. And if he doesn't, we'll just do it the rest of the show. So that was my 7. So I don't think we did your 7.
Oh, yes. My 7, finally, I can get to Javonte Williams.
There we go.
the disrespect to have him here at 7. And, if I had more than a 1-game sample of him getting full duties, I think I would have a different outlook here. My question, I guess, was always, I can assume rational coaching, which is probably a dumb idea most of the time. But in the case of Denver, and I know Melvin Gordon's been good. I understand and appreciate that Melvin Gordon has been solid. But my question is always, okay, Javonte Williams is amazing. He's a stud. Why isn't he getting more of the work when Melvin is in? Melvin can be good for a spell back. Why hasn't Javonte taken that leap over him? It probably is just a coaching thing. It probably is just a play calling thing and not an indictment of Javonte Williams. But I think that's my hiccup here. And the other hiccup is what, again, is happening with the offense next year. So down the line, sure, things can absolutely get righted in Denver unless they go out and make a splash signing next year at quarterback. I don't know. I feel like, yes, he can still be really, 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 really good. Can he be top 5 good? I don't know. So that's my only hang up with him.
Yeah, and I get that. I was big on him coming into the year. He was my RB2 over ETN behind Najee. And it was kind of a big gap for me between Javonte and ETN. So it's kind of, what we're seeing in spurts is kind of confirmation bias for me. So, and I also think that just value-wise, we're going to see, when Gordon leaves, even though everyone knows there's a really good chance Gordon's going to leave, when Gordon leaves, everyone's going to just shoot his value up to the stratosphere, I think. So that's why I had him so high. So I will get to my 8, which is a guy who hasn't been mentioned yet. And I think this is a guy, if Scott was here and maybe you will think I probably have a little too high. It's Austin Eckler. He's another one of those pass catching guys. And this is a guy I could see you guys not having on your list, but he is a little older. This is when I started getting into the older guys, was in the second half of this, this bottom third of the list. So Austin Eckler, he's been the RB2 this year, pretty much behind Jonathan Taylor. He was the RB2 earlier, even behind Derrick Henry before JT took off, and he's kind of stayed in that spot. He keeps producing week after week, and as we talked about, he's another one of those pass catching guys that I think can have a longer career. He's been banged up here and there, but hasn't had anything too serious. So, and the reason I have him over some other guys we've talked about already, like Kamara and CMC even, which I know most people will probably think is nuts, is that I just think that it's the situation. He's tied to Herbert. He's tied to a good offense there. Keenan's there. Mike Williams might be leaving, but I just think that offense is going to be pretty good for a while. And Carolina's and New Orleans, I have no idea. So, like I said, Saquon, I don't either, but I just am such a fan of the talent. So, Jake, why don't you go on? Why don't you tell us what you think about Eckler, and then we'll move on to the next guy on the list.
Yeah, Eckler felt like he's at number 12 for me. And it's another situation where I probably should have had him higher. And it just felt like a small sample again with a guy where, so this is the first year we've gotten to see him really endure the big workload and be properly utilized at the goal line. We didn't get to see that at all in previous years. And it was frustrating, I think, for a lot of us who had high hopes for Austin Eckler. Of course, you were always saved by his pass catching ability. So we're talking PPR here. That's why there's no way I could keep him outside of my top 12. I wanted to bump him up a little higher. It was more a factor of like, I don't know what guys I can actually move down to get him there. It's nothing against Austin Eckler. And to the point that I made about Alvin Kamara before, where he can sustain a lengthy career, a la Danny Woodhead, my favorite reference for all pass-catching running backs, probably for eternity. I'll never stop comparing them to Danny Woodhead. But like Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, yes, he can maintain that usage for a longer period of time. I just don't think he's proven to hold up quite as well as Kamara has. Kamara, yes, I mean, he's He's dealt with some issues here this year. But over the course of his career, I haven't felt like here's a guy who's not going to stick, from week to week. Here's a guy who I'm going to have to worry about getting crunched all the time. Austin Eckler just still feels like he's too, I don't want to say too small, but it does feel a little bit like, can he hold up to a consistent workload? And not just catching passes, but if he continues to get used at the goal line and in short yardage situations, how long can he hold up for? Of course, it'll probably be at least a couple of years. So again, 12 could be tough, but I just couldn't figure out who to put over him.
Yeah, and I don't fault you there. Like I said, I think most people would have him probably a little lower than I do. So yeah, Eckler at 12 for you. So who? I think we said you're 9.
Yeah, I'll even just bang off my 8, 9, 10 real quick because they're all guys that we've already talked about. So I'm not going to belabor the point too much. But at 8, I had Dalvin Cook. Again, probably should have him higher after this game. At 9, I had Saquon here finally. And then at 10, I had Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, I could understand the case for him being inside the top 5 now. I wouldn't have said that coming into this season. I was basically completely out on Joe Mixon. He made me look quite the fool. And in that, he has maybe the most assured offensive situation of most of these guys, I think, on the list for me. But I think his upside's still a little capped, honestly. I know he can have massive games, and he's been more consistent this year. I don't know that he can maintain that. It's like, man, we had to wait until, what is this, year 5 now to see this out of Mixon, or year 4? It's like, what about all of those other years? I know he dealt with injuries and all of that. But no, I couldn't bump him down out of my top 10 either.
Yeah. So, and I think the next couple guys I have are guys we've talked about as well. 9 is where I finally have Christian McCaffrey.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's. I just, like I said, some of it's probably emotional. Just having to deal with it. I've owned him in a couple leagues over the past few years, and just dealing with the injuries year after year after year. Not year after year, but game after game after game, and
Right.
in the last 2 years, and again, situation. And I kind of see him, and you mentioned it, I think, when we talked about him earlier. The workload, I don't think is going to be there ever again. I think you'd have to be insane at this point as a coach to have him, give him that kind of workload, give him what's happened these last 2 years. So I kind of see him as sort of Eckler-esque going forward, actually, where he's going to get a ton of passing work, but he's not going to get as much work rushing the ball, and he'll score you some touchdowns just like Eckler does. But I just don't see the workload being there, and I don't see him being in as good of an offense as Eckler's going to be, unless they maybe get, like Deshaun Watson or something. Then I definitely move him up from 9. And again, the age thing, but Eckler has that as well. I have them back to back. I have them 8 and 9. They're very close to me. Like I said, I see them similarly. And 10 was Alvin Kamara for me. Again, situation. So basically, those 3 pass catching guys, I kind of all have basically all in one tier. I could move them 8 to 10 in any order, basically. So
honestly, your system seems a lot more rational when you put it out like that. All these 3 guys really are of a similar type, and I think part of it is probably just still name attachment for me and not being able to move on from their historical production. Because I don't, an 8 gap difference between CMC and Eckler for me. When you put it that way, it's a little weird.
But I get it. Eckler doesn't have the cachet that CMC has, and he may never. If we're talking value in this as well as production, I mean, he still's probably even after this season, he could probably finish as RB2, and I still don't know that he's necessarily above. Maybe they're equal at best. Like come the off season when people aren't worried about points and things like that, I think maybe they're approximately equal, because you can still get it. I still think you can get a decent amount for CMC in a trade. And in the off season, as the people don't care that he's not scoring points anymore, I think its value is just going to go up again. So I don't think it's crazy to have him that far apart. That's just where I am. So we're through 10, I think, on each of our lists. So why don't you give your 11?
11, I finally got Antonio Gibson in here.
Oh,
and
that's right.
Again, it's like, man, I look at this list and the guys stepping on his head on top of this list is like, he could so easily. And that's the thing. You mentioned it earlier. If this was tomorrow and I went ahead and deleted this list and started fresh, this could change so many different ways. And Antonio Gibson's growth is still probably the most exciting out of everybody outside of, I'd say, Javonte Williams and Najee. Like, his is the most exciting and has the biggest ceiling on here. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think we actually talked about your 12 earlier, which was my 8, Eckler. So we got through Jake's entire list. I actually have 2 guys we have not talked about yet as the bottom 2 guys on my list. Number 11, I'm again going old guy, and it's Derrick Henry, actually. I just think there's potential there. Given some of the other things I said, I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't even had him on there. I probably should have had Cook over him. Cook's got a couple years less. It's not in a bad offense, especially after what we're seeing tonight. Where's he at right now? 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. So
wild.
Yeah. So I think I might replace him with Cook at this point, maybe move Henry down to 12 or 13. But when I was doing this, that's what I was thinking. It's just I think there's still potential there for one great season, and that was enough for me to put him at 11. He seems, up until this year, he seemed pretty indestructible. But and I don't even know the injury he got was a quote unquote sort of workload injury, that he just had too many that's what we all worry about. But I think of that more as we start seeing that soft tissue stuff and hamstring pulls and torn ligaments or something like that. He just kind of broke his foot. So
right.
I mean just with just getting so many carries, you're increasing your chances for injury. But I don't know that it's necessarily an overuse injury. So I still think he has the potential to kind of stay healthy through all of next year and produce one more great season, even at 28. So again, I feel like now that I'm reading this and saying this out loud, that I may be contradicting everything I said and all my other guys. But what are your thoughts on Henry?
He again felt egregious to leave out, but I was erring on the side of better to be a year too early to announce somebody dead for fantasy purposes than a year too late. And I'm not saying that he's going to be completely irrelevant or useless or anything like that, but I do think that cliff that I was kind of anticipating happening when we came into the season, I think might finally be there once he returns from this injury. But we'll see. I mean, I already heard reports that they're talking like he might try and make his way back here this year yet. I was like, whoa, okay, that could change everything for me. And then he might sneak into my top 12. If I can see him close out the season and look anywhere like close Henry, to what he looks like. Yeah, then, hey, that one season for next year for dynasty purposes would be worth a top 12 spot.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. And they have been talking about that even if he doesn't come back in the regular season, if assuming the Titans make the playoffs, I think they think there is a decent shot. I think it was a 6 to 10 week injury when they announced it, which was about mid-season-ish. So that would get him in line to be back for the playoffs. So it'll be very interesting if he comes back, if he's rolling up 150 and 2 or 3 touchdowns or not. I definitely think if that happens, that value is going to be there even with the injury this year. But we'll have to see. Sure. And my 12 was a guy who's not even playing, J.K. Dobbins. I was just very high on him coming out. He looked great last year in limited. Oh, look who's here. Scott Sidlow.
Okay.
Okay, that was fun. I was just talking about J.K. Dobbins.
Great.
Scott has returned from his technical difficulties. I actually had him at my 12 because of how good he looked last year. And one thing I wanted to bring up, I need to pull it up on my screen here, is this is sort of what convinced me, because I had so much trouble doing this list too. This was really hard, mixing up these old guys and these young guys and who you want. But what convinced me is Devonta Freeman, since he got the workload after their bye, like that's when he started getting double-digit carries. So week 9 on, which is a small sample, 5 weeks, but he's been the RB11, and that's the corpse of Devonta Freeman. And he's also getting some pass catching work. He has a 6-target game. He has a couple 4-target games, and that's one of the big worries we had about Dobbins is, would Lamar throw him the ball? Because they don't get their running backs involved that much. And he just looked electric running the ball last year. As long as, he fully recovers from that ACL injury, which with today's modern medicine, I think we usually see guys do come back to full strength eventually. It might not be at the beginning of the season, but since his was before the season, maybe it will. But I just think that there's so much potential there. And, apparently with running backs, I'm more ageist than I am anywhere else. So another young guy to round out the list.
You made a great point, though, with Dobbins that I hadn't considered, which was the pass catching thing. Like, I had written that off, and I hadn't even allowed Devonta Freeman to enter my brain in that way. Because why would I at this point? Because it feels icky to let him roam around in there. 29-year-old somehow doing the things that he's doing now on the Ravens offense. But it's a really valid point. And the injury thing, I guess it's nice that his injury occurred so early in a weird way. I almost add Cam Akers as my number 12 here. And I probably just got caught up in the hype videos that he posted of him like training. Because if he is full health, then, that would be a game changer too.
Yeah, and I just worry the Achilles has always been that, death injury for running backs. But I mean, Deontay Foreman is had a 100-yard game last week. I mean, it's not like he's producing regularly and has just finally got back in the NFL, really. Right. But I mean, it shows you can come back, and I don't think anybody expects him to never come back. It's just I don't think I can depend on him to produce at the level we were all hoping for. That's why I didn't really have him considered for my list. But Scott, any thoughts on Dobbins here?
So I had written down 17 running backs when I was doing my initial rankings here and trying to figure out where they are, and I didn't even write down Dobbins. So was he kind of out of sight, out of mind? Maybe a little bit. He's definitely would not be, that far down. I'd certainly have him above guys like, Zeke and Aaron Jones and Monty and some of those guys. So he probably is real close to 12 for me, maybe like 13 or 14. So yeah, not too far out there.
And Scott, I guess why don't we kind of let you run down your list a little bit since you disappeared on us. I think we had gotten through your top 5 or so. I think Cook was at 5, and then you kind of disappeared on us, and me and Jake just went at it for the rest of our list. So you'll probably mention a lot of guys we already mentioned, but why don't you throw them out there?
Yeah, that's fine. So in that third tier, then I had Cook at 5, Kamara at 6, and then CMC at 7. A lot of the things Jake said about CMC, I think if they can find a way to use him, somebody else in the backfield and give him less touches, I think both Kamara and CMC could play for, longer than the typical back just to be productive with the pass catching and everything. And then I had another tier break there, and I had Chubb and Barkley and Eckler. That is like my all avoid tier of like, look at the upside and look at the points, but like, oh my God, can you like bleed? I mean, I love Nick Chubb. He just doesn't really catch any passes. Even when Hunt was out, like he didn't really catch any passes. So I love Nick Chubb. He's great. He's going to get volume, but I really don't know what's going on in Cleveland. There's another franchise that we just don't know. So I'd love to have Chubb higher, but that's just kind of where we're at with him. And then obviously Barkley and Eckler, everybody knows about. And then rounding it out, then I had, so I think that was
10, I think
9, 10. And then, so I had, I had Elijah Mitchell kind of flirting there. And I thought, you know what, that volume, that offense, but I think I'm going to have him at 13 or 14, mix him in with Dobbins there. And so I had Antonio Gibson and Joe Mixon. And I think I would have Mixon 11 and Gibson 12.
Okay, yeah, and those I think are all guys we both had on our list, pretty much. So yeah, a lot of overlap there. If you, I had CMC, by the way, if you were curious, since I mentioned him before you left. I had him down at 9, so we weren't too far off.
Okay. Okay.
And I was trying to see. I mentioned to you guys we're going to try and come up with a little consensus here using a little point system. And my spreadsheet's not working.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to mention I pulled all these guys up points per game so far this season, and Kamara's at 4. So it's just he's doing what he does, right? He's just missed some games, but he's been doing it, whether it's Trevor Siemian or Jameis Winston, or it hasn't mattered. So it's great to see that. Najee's at 9, all that volume, even a bad situation, still volume at 9. Swift at 10. CMC still 7. Eckler at 3. Mixon at 5. So I mean, you can see it kind of varies all over the board here, but the point is there's production to be had, and there may actually be some opportunities to maybe trade for some of these older backs as they come down from the peak value where it's like you just couldn't buy them because it's so much to give up. But I think they'll continue producing for, more years as they continue catching passes. Those CMCs, the Camaras, the Ecklers, Mixon getting involved now, catching passes. I think those guys will actually have some value here over the next few years.
Yeah, definitely agree with a lot of what you said there, and I did finish that while you were talking. So thanks for doing that, Scott. So what comes out is sort of the consensus top 12. I kind of just did a 12-to-1 point system based on our lists. Plugged into spreadsheets. Taylor Swift. I love doing that, by the way. Taylor Swift. Just like Williamson, by the way, Scott.
Right.
Taylor Swift at 1 and 2. Najee, Javonte. So that's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. CMC comes in at 5 based off our list. Kamara 6. Saquon 7. Cook and Chubb come in at 8 and 9, partially because I left them off entirely, and I regret leaving Cook off at this point.
As you should.
And Mixon at 10, Gibson at 11, who I had much higher. I think I hadn't got to him when you were gone. I had him far the highest of us. I think I had him at 6 or 5 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Eckler comes in at 12. So.
Okay.
So now you guys everyone listening out there knows exactly how to judge the running back landscape because we just gave it to you. So
perfect.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay, so we'll get into Find Me a Trade now. Finish up with Find Me a Trade. This one was submitted by friend of the show and recent guest Justin Rogers at Run DFF.
Oh, so you did figure out how to put the name on here.
Yeah, this time I did. Yes, when I'm on the show, I put the name on here, Scott. Last week I was not hosting, Jake. Andrew was in my place, Andrew Hall, and I completely forgot to put who put in the trade, who gave it to us. So they had a lot of fun ribbing at my expense.
Listen, we made the decision when you have the tripod and there's 2 of the 3 of us, we just blame whoever's not here.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think it's a good methodology. Honestly,
right?
it's worked for a lot of other trios in the past. So I think you're wise to adapt it.
But yeah, so that's Justin. He's from the Dynasty Hot Sauce Pod. If you're not familiar, go listen to that. It's super fun show to listen to. And Larry and Justin are really smart guys. But he is in, especially if you listen to that pod or the Dynasty Trades HQ pod. This is the infamous Dynasty Trades HQ1, the OG listener league. It's a 16-team PPR super flex with a 1.25 tight end premium, which you don't see very much. So just a slight tight end premium. 0.1 points per carry. Small bonuses for big plays. Small return yardage points. Basically 1 point every 25 return yards. And there's 30-man rosters.
If you think about it like that.
Yeah. And there's 30-man rosters with 10 taxi spots and start 11. And again, this is a 16-team league, so everything's super deep. So they start 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, super flex, 3 flex, and that's it. So he says he's a strong contender, battled injuries all year, trying to make a move to solidify starting lineup. He has, we'll get into his roster in a second, but he prefers not to trade Kyler or Mahomes unless he's getting a stud QB in return. The playoff teams are locked in, but he hasn't been able to get it done with anybody who's been eliminated so far. So let me pull up his roster. I can share the screen here. There we go. Hopefully people can see that. So he has, like as we said, Mahomes and Kyler. He's got Cam Newton on his third, a couple backups. He's got Saquon. He's got Kareem Hunt. He's got Miles Sanders. CMC's on his IR. So he lost him. Mark Ingram is also down there because of the COVID IR. So he's down there. And other than that, not much else startable at running back. Maybe Phillip Lindsay eventually. Who knows? Devontae Adams, Odell Beckham, Hollywood Brown, Brandon Cooks, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver, as well as Chester Rogers. So pretty solid there. He has had Michael Thomas on his IR the whole year. At tight end, he's got Mike Gesicki, Pat Freiermuth, Evan Ingram, Ricky Seals-Jones may be an option at this point, and that's pretty much it there. He also has Chuba Hubbard on his taxi, so he may want to elevate him and possibly start him. So that's where his roster's at, and we'll get into the trades. I guess I'll go to mine first. Guy we've been talking about a bit tonight, Christian McCaffrey. That's who I decided to send off to try and bolster his squad here, because basically I was originally trying to think of a small move, but he doesn't really have any picks, so it's not like he can throw a third or a second at somebody for some lower end guy that he can just stick in his lineup. And so to me, CMC seemed his best option to try and upgrade and get some points in his lineup to try and take this home. By the way, he's 11-2. He's in the 2 seed. I don't know if he has the bye clinch, but it looks pretty likely. So he's definitely a strong contender. So with CMC as a trade chip, I wanted to try and target a team that just missed the playoffs. I thought that was a good idea. They kind of look at CMC as like this option that could get him over the top next year, because like we talked about, I think most people still think he's going to be fairly productive going forward. And at FF Blitz, which is Michael Sipes from the Dynasty Trades HQ, his team is 7-6, but he's out of the playoffs. It's already been, like Justin said in his description to us, all the teams have already been determined. He's not in there, so he wasn't that far off. And I figured he's also a guy, just because normally we don't have this kind of info, but as someone who listens to their pod, I know he's a guy who's always trying to win right now. He always talks about how he sends off all his picks and he wants to win now. So I could see him doing a move like this where he gets a guy that can help him win now in 2022. So it made a lot of sense to me to target him. CMC replaces Fournette for him next year. Who I forget if I said who he was getting. It would be for Fournette, Gronk, and maybe another small piece if you can squeeze it out of him. I mentioned guys like Edmonds and Parker. Edmonds is coming back from IR this week. Devontae Parker and guys like this in a 16-team start. Anybody who has a pulse has basically value in a start 11, 16-team league. So even though they don't sound exciting, I wouldn't mind squeezing one of them out of them. But yeah, CMC can replace Fournette for him. He has Waller at tight end, so Gronk, that isn't a huge loss for a team that isn't playing anymore this year. And both of those guys are guys that a lot of people don't see having value in 2022, and to the point where I think some people will consider this cheap to sell CMC. I think maybe you guys do, maybe you guys don't. So yeah, I think that would get a bunch of points into his lineup without having to give anything he's worried about now. And I think it's something that get done because I can definitely see another owner, especially like I said, Sipes, taking on CMC for guys he doesn't necessarily think are going to help him too much in 2022. So Jake, I saw you nodding there. Is that agreement or just, you're crazy, Rocky?
It's a little bit of both. You're crazy like a fox. Because I did look at, there's 2 pieces I initially looked at for this. And one of them was CMC, and the other was Saquon. And Saquon got in my head a little bit because we're doing these rankings for the Dynasty running backs, and like Saquon ended up lower on my list than I thought in my head he would. And so I thought, okay, why not? While he still has all of that name value, why not try and maybe trade him? So I'd like to focusing on those 2 points, or in your case, in CMC. I'm higher than you are on CMC, so I think it would be tougher for me to give him up, but I definitely can appreciate the value there.
Yeah, and I just think there's a lot of value, especially in getting 2 or 3 guys in that kind of league. In case there's more injuries to get through the playoffs, and those are for 2022. Those are high end guys. I mean, Fournette's a top 5 or 6 running back. Gronk is essentially the tight end 2 when he's playing. And then, like I said, the other piece would just be sort of like, oh, well, I have another guy I could possibly start if I have some more injuries or something. So, Scott, any thoughts on that one? Then maybe we'll get into yours.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably talked about trading CMC like every single week for the last like 2 months. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that for sure. I think the trade makes sense. Like, it's, hey, I'm going to win this season. But the thing is, with a trade like that, you have to win because next year, then it's like, all right, what happens with Gronk? What happens with Fournette? I mean, I think Fournette's going to have some value.
Yeah, and I do think Gronk, I don't know if he's going to be this good next year, but I think Gronk's going to be there as long as Brady's there.
I agree. And I think if he's playing, he's going to produce, even if it ends up being like the old like Tony Gonzalez or Antonio Gates, where it was just like, hey, just run into the end zone and, you'll get 10 touchdowns out of it. So, yeah, I mean, they're not going to go to 0 after this season, but if CMC rebounds in any way whatsoever next year, you're going to feel like you sold low. And so if you won, you can live with it. But if you didn't win, you're probably going to be kicking yourself a little bit. But yeah, those are the types of trades you need to make to win. You're giving up nothing and you're adding points to your lineup. So absolutely, I would do it to win, and that's what it's all about.
Exactly. So yeah, and he's been talking about, especially early in the season. If you listen to Justin's pod, he's been talking about how he's going to win this thing all year. So yes. I'm sure he wants to make that push. So, yes. Scott, you want to give yours, and then we'll finish up with Jake's.
Yeah. So I mean, I can definitely see why he would send this one in. I mean, it's 16 teams. There's a lot to look at. It's easy to say, hey, just throw a future pick, but when you don't have any future picks, obviously you can't do that, right? So CMC kind of seemed like the obvious choice to move, but I decided to go a little bit different direction. I thought about maybe moving Cam because he said he looked at the teams that were eliminated. I thought, well, why don't you look at the teams that are in it that could maybe need a second or third quarterback to solidify? Because honestly, if you lose Mahomes or Kyler and you have to start Cam, you're not winning anyway. I think it's actually an advantage if you could give one of your competition Cam to start, because likely he's going to lose it for them. So I would enjoy giving Cam to my competition. I didn't really find anything that made perfect sense for that. And Cam's value is just kind of all over the board. I actually saw him traded straight up for Dobbins in a league right at the deadline last week. Cam Newton for Dobbins. Wow. And that's a team that's like all in going for it. Like, they needed a quarterback. And it's like, I mean, I would never do that. I don't care.
But yeah, like I just pay cheaper. Like I have a league where I'm going for it, and I actually have. It's funny, this league. I thought about mentioning this earlier too, because I noticed this recently. This league, I started off 1-4. This is kind of like never. We always talk about trying to get out early, being the first to rebuild, but sometimes maybe you don't need to give up. I was 1-4, 8th in points, and I started trying to sell people off. I even sold Kamara for Montgomery at first and something else. I think like a third or something.
And then he got you more points.
and then this was actually when Montgomery was hurt though, so he didn't even get me points right away. Okay. But I started winning, and thanks to Bobby Koch for this term, but he called it spike contending. So I started making some little small moves. Like I picked up Elijah Mitchell for a second before he really broke out, and some things like that. And right now I'm not haven't clinched a playoff spot, but I am third in points, and there are point spots in this league, so it looks pretty likely. I'm third in points, 7-6 after a 1-4, 8th in point start. And I completely forget where that started from. So I went off on that tangent.
As all good stories do.
Yeah, I know. I went off on that
course.
tangent, and I can't remember what we were talking about.
I mean,
it was Cam and in that league, Cam and Dobbins. I have Tua and Wentz, who neither of which are playing this week. I just traded Robert Woods for Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, get somebody cheaper than giving up J.K. Dobbins.
Much better than Dobbins for Cam. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And which may be an overpay, but I want to win this week and score enough points. So
yeah. I get it. And I mean, Ben should have had a great matchup. I don't know what they're doing out there.
Yeah,
so
it's
I started him in a league I needed.
I think Ben has one touchdown and not much yards.
Yeah, just one. Najee got the last one. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so I looked at the IR to see what could he move without sacrificing any of his lineup currently, and Michael Thomas was still on there. Michael Thomas is dead to me. He's been dead to me for years. I never even liked him, mostly because of where he went to college. So I really didn't have any shares to begin with.
Hates.
Yeah, I just I just refuse. So the thing is, he still kind of has that name value. Like, you're not going to get anything great for him. So I kind of offered an alternative here because I didn't think this first deal was really realistic. If he could add a pick, it could be. But my first trade here is trade Michael Thomas to Heiser for A.J. Dillon. And I know A.J. Dillon's probably not going to win you the league, but when you have all those flex spots and you need to start somebody, he's going to have a role. He's going to get points every week. And if Jones ends up getting banged up again or whatever, I mean, he could win the league. Plus, he's a young piece that you can use going forward or trade in the offseason, whatever. Again, if you had a third to throw in with that, something like that, that might get it done. So the other thing I looked at here was Brian Hooton has Damian Harris, and his team's kind of rebuilding. I don't know how he feels about Harris, if he thinks of him as a piece he wants to build around. I think it's kind of hard to build around a New England running back, so I personally wouldn't do it. And honestly, I hate trading for him too, but Thomas is not getting you points. Harris would get you points, and you could always trade him after the season, obviously. So I think as just another piece to plug in somebody who's going to get touches every week, wide receivers are really volatile. And when you have that 16 teams and you can plug in someone who's guaranteed to get points every week, that's valuable. And with the pieces that he has, if Kyler and Mahomes just play to their average potential, you don't need a lot from the rest of your lineup. Because you already have an advantage every week from those two. So just kind of a small trade, nothing crazy, but that sometimes is all it takes to put you over the top.
Yeah, and I like that as a small trade because, again, you're giving up somebody who's giving you no points and getting points. And I've never been a big Dillon guy, but I'm coming around to what was that?
Me neither. But he has a role. He'll get you points. And if Jones goes down, he can win you the league. So, I mean,
agreed.
You have to take chances like that.
Yeah, and I get it. And I think he's definitely going to be in, like you said, he has a role. He's going to be involved regardless the rest of the way. And we've seen many games, especially recently with the Jones injury. And I think even before that, where there'll be games where Dillon outscores Jones. He's a lot of times they'll use him as a closer at the end of the game, or he'll end up being the one that gets a touchdown.
Well, and this week in particular, they want to keep Rodgers resting a little bit, keep that toe, healthy. And so they're going to just hand it off. They're going to have the game in control by halfway through the first quarter. So they're just going to, A.J. Dillon, Aaron Jones the rest of the way and just crush the Bears. So he's going to have a nice game there, and they're going to keep leaning on that, especially home games with the weather, just situations like that. He's going to get touches. He's going to score points.
Yeah, and if you can get either from it, I think a lot of people are kind of sort of where we both are on Michael Thomas, and it's hard to get a lot from him. But if you can get either guy, I think it's just going to kind of depend on how the other manager views Michael Thomas. If he's like us and like his value is dust, I don't want him. So he's 29.
I mean, if I have Damian Harris and someone offers me Michael Thomas, I probably take it just for the fact that
there.
His value, right? His value is not going to get lower. Like, he's going to come back and play next year, probably. Well, we think anyway. And so if he does, whether it's New Orleans or somewhere else, I mean, you're going to get more than Damian Harris.
Yeah, and if he plays at 75% of Michael Thomas from the past, that we saw 2 years ago. Yeah, then you can definitely get more than Damian Harris. So, Jake, me and Scott have been rambling a while here. Why don't you, if you have any thoughts on that trade, you can go ahead, or you can just get right into yours, whatever you want to do.
I just want to say that I appreciate a small potatoes trade here, because when I was looking through these, like, it became really hard to find this big, massive trade like you did, Rocky, that would definitely be like a big time.
I'm usually the big, massive trade guys for find me a trade. It's funny I mentioned I look for something small first, because I'm always the guy who ends up with like the big giant ones. But yeah.
Boy, if I could have a little more cojones with this, I think I'd probably win my leagues a little bit more often. And Scott's trade, like, I would definitely much rather have AJ Dillon. Of course, part of that's just my Packers homerism, I'm sure, is staring me in the face. But in general, like, I really just do trust him a lot more than I would, Damian Harris. But
agreed.
Either or, I like it. I think I like it more than mine. If I'm being honest, I think mine is the worst of all three trades. So thanks for ending on mine. I looked at this as like, you guys both made points, very valid points about, hey, I'm trading away guys who are not scoring literally any points, and I am absorbing points onto my lineup, hypothetically. That's an amazing point, and maybe something I should have looked at before I put in either Mike Gesicki or Pat Freiermuth as my two trade away options here, just because I've been in so many tight end premium leagues where I feel people do overvalue that aspect of the game a little bit too much. Now, Mike Gesicki has surprisingly been kind of crushing it, except for the last handful of weeks. I think he's still tight end 4 on the season, which is a mind blower there. So trading away those points, do you want to do it? Maybe not, but that's why I put Pat Freiermuth here too, somebody who's come on very strong, and you're looking for a rebuilding team to take on a youthful tight end. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. I think people are starting to value him close to Kyle Pitts right now because, the production has certainly been there more for Freiermuth. And his situation should only get better as things go on. But I looked at Shane Swagger's team here, and he's got Josh Jacobs. And yeah, it's a little gross if you're somebody like me, who historically not the biggest Josh Jacobs fan, but agreed. Kenyon Drake is gone. So he's a non-factor. So the touches should be there. And I'd rather have the consistent touch guy in Josh Jacobs than one of these tight ends who are still going to be flukier. It's still possible for you to win that or lose that matchup, with these tight ends. But he also has 3 guys at tight end who I think should all be great to end out the season. Mike Gesicki, Pat Freiermuth, except for today, apparently, or tonight's game. And then Ricky Seals-Jones, because Logan Thomas, as we mentioned, is out now. Ricky Seals-Jones, in like the 5 games he's actually gotten meaningful snaps, he's kind of crushed it. I can't see a world where you want to start all 3 of these guys at some point this year, even with your flexes there. So it's like, might as well get rid of one of them to build up that running back depth.
Plus, he's going to have Gronk when he does my trade. So
there you go. Do all these trades, and then you'll really be set.
No, I like you said, I kind of like like me and Scott did. I do like the idea of giving up no points for points. But I like what you said, because especially I mentioned at the beginning, like I don't know how these people are valuing the tight end premium if they think about it that way. To me, 1.25 is not even like, I don't even think about it being a tight end premium at that point. It's too low. Like 1.5, I think, is iffy to even worry about tight end premium. Trade Addicts is 1.75 in those leagues, and that's when I really start valuing it. And me and Scott are in a league together that's 2.0. That's when it's really, it really matters. 1.25, it's like whatever. So if people are valuing it as tight end premium just because it is called a tight end premium league, I kind of see it as like you said, I would rather do Gesicki actually, because I love Freiermuth and I think he's going to be a monster. But
agreed. I
yeah,
like that.
Even though Gesicki is the guy that technically has scored more points right now, but
I think just volume though, all the receivers were hurt, and he was like the only guy, and that's why he was producing, and now he's not because they finally got back, Parker and some of those guys. So I think like when he gets the volume, he's incredible. I mean, he's really a wide receiver, honestly, more so than a tight end. So, but yeah, if you could trade him for Jacob, again, Jacob's a guy I don't like either, but it gives you that floor, which again, in a 16-team league, I'm loving the floor. Like, you need upside guys, but with those two quarterbacks, having that floor, that's huge. I mean, that's still, I like that trade a lot, actually, Jake. I like that.
Yeah, so, and what I was going to say is when I was looking at it, it's you're kind of giving like an overvalued guy for what I think is an undervalued guy. Like you mentioned the floor there. I'm pulling up his PPR point. I have a league that's just vanilla PPR. That's what I use for when I pull up PPR points. He has no games he's one game all year in single digits. He's most of them at 17, 16.7, 15.2, 15.8, and he's starting to get more. He was starting to get more pass catching work these past couple of weeks, and now Kenyon Drake's gone. So, I think Josh Jacobs outproduces Mike Gesicki the rest of the year, even with the 1.25 tight end premium. So, I like the idea as well. So I have no problem with that one. So I think it's good trades all around this week.
We did it, guys.
We did it. And just in case anyone's wondering, Ben is bailing me out a little with my Woods for Ben trade because he threw another touchdown while we were talking. So
yes, yes.
Do I believe James Washington
needed that? Needed that.
So, but that finishes up our trades. So that pretty much finishes up the show. So Jake, as usual, we are approaching the 90-minute mark here. So
it's what we do.
Yeah, it's what we do. But Jake, I want to thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun, a lot of good talk. And I want to just give you a chance to, let everybody know your Twitter handle, where they can find you, what you're all doing, all that good stuff.
Well, I appreciate allowing my return here. We talked before we got on the air officially that this was a little bit of a reunion from a disaster of a game show that I don't really want to talk about. But John, I love this comment from John, by the way, in the chat. This show is much better than listening to Troy and Joe Buck because most things are.
Yeah, it's a low bar, but we'll take it.
Well, yeah, we'll take it.
But you can find me being better than Troy and Joe Buck out on Twitter at Jake Trowbridge. I don't know. I'm just doing stuff. I do podcasts. You can find them. They're in my Twitter bio. Feel free to do that.
Okay, if you're not going to, I just had to mention, because I think I said this every time probably with you, Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football is the best podcast name ever. That's literally what I do every week. So
I love it.
I just wanted to get that the name of the podcast out there, because I love that you actually named your podcast Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football.
Try and be straightforward, right to the punch. We don't want to be cutesy. We just want to tell folks what they're getting before they get it.
Oh, I love it. So thanks again, Jake. I just want to finish up with some of our business here. Again, I'm at Dynasty FF Addict. He's at Scott_Sidlow. It's like a tongue twister there. This is like the fourth time I've stumbled over my words tonight. Maybe too many of those beers tonight. I don't know. But our third host who's not here tonight is Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. Follow the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, the DAP Network at DAP_network. Also, please make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. That's how you can see us live. You can see Fantasy Timeline live as well. Occasionally, Trade Addicts goes live. So, all good stuff. And also, follow the DAP Network. Subscribe to the DAP Network. Follow us at Dynasty Junkies. Rate, review. Anything else I'm forgetting, Scott?
Nope, you pretty much got it covered, man. Just shout out to all our homies in the comments. Always love you guys interacting and throwing in some zingers there like McGlynn. Appreciate that. But yeah, KJ Osborne just got a long touchdown, so I'm super happy about that. That bails me out in quite a few spots there, which I believe one of them is against you, Rocky. I think I'm starting Cook and Osborne.
I did start him in a league where I'm in the 7th seed trying to get in, so I guess it helps there.
There you go. It'll all work out.
Being in 33 leagues it's always helping you and hurting you.
Right, exactly. So with that being said, please, for our guest at Jake Trowbridge, please follow him. He's a great follow, one of my favorites, fantasy football or otherwise. Honestly, one of my favorite follows on Twitter. For Rocky, Dynasty FF Addict, and for myself at Scott Sidlow, Junkies out.